This is an event that happened when I was only 12. I was visiting my grandparents. They used to both live on a farm in Montana. My visits were something common during summer. My parents having just got divorced, and to be honest, visiting my grandparents while they still lived at a farm gave me a lot of peace during those times. They had cattle, chickens, and cows. The place was very calming. I grew up hearing their stories about entities living in corn mazes, ghosts, and UFOs. And yes, I also learned about the dog eater, or otherwise known as the shunka warakin, thanks to my grandfather. They lived a few miles away from Sun Ranch, where that guy supposedly caught the first one in the 19th century. So, the story was pretty hot for local folklore. I mean, it helps to explain why some animals disappear, or just appear dead. And in the fields, odd things just happen. People are accustomed to living with that. My grandparents were pretty chill about things. They just not talk about certain topics, or got rather annoyed at me when I insisted on knowing more stuff. One day, it just happened. A dog appeared with wounds. So did 2 sheep. The previous night was rather noisy. We'd hear the animals whining and whimpering. But since my grandparents never got up to check what was wrong, I stayed in the room I used to sleep in. I can remember that the cat was uncharacteristically nervous that day. She would not let me touch her. It kept going on like that for 2 or 3 more days. The weirdest part was the cat would not let me cuddle her, and she would come and sleep with me at night if scared of something. Animals there were very free. My grandparents would let them wander off, but they would always return. On the last day, we saw a dead lamb. I remember my grandparents wondering if coyotes or possibly wolves were close by, trying to steal the cattle. There was another dog wounded, and we'd all supposed it was a boy, just can't remember the name, tried to protect the animals. Whatever, we just knew something was wrong. My granddad talked about cameras and that stuff. There were modern conveniences at the ranch, but that was it. So, the next night, I stay awake until late hours and hide by the door, on guard. I don't know if I was expecting to see the same chupacabras or something exciting. I just wanted to be there, witnessing what was ever going to happen to the animals that night. The cat stayed scared in the room, and Toby, the dog, kept inside the house, also looking scared. I remember staying on watch most of the night, until I heard grunting and whimpering. Even the sheep seemed scared. Something was happening. And then I hear one dog howling. It sounded like it was in pain. So I went out to yell at whatever was outside, carrying a shovel. And that's when I witnessed 3 dogs grunting. 2 were ours, the third like a coyote, but it had a shorter mane by its back, and spots, like a hyena. It was biting viciously at one dog, and I realized it gnawing. I saw blood, and something got a hold of me. I can't explain it. I began to yell, taking the shovel to hit it. The animal turned to me. It was not a hyena, nor a coyote. I got scared. It wasn't any normal animal. It grunted at me, but I still got the shovel, and 2 other dogs came by my side and began to bark. Now I was feeling a little more safety with numbers. It was 4 versus 1. The thing ran away into the maze of corn. I dragged my wounded dog inside, and my grandmother got mad at me after hearing what had happened. And that's the story of how I managed to scare what was probably the shunka warakin, or dog eater, when I was 12. Polson, Montana is a rather small city that sits on the southern shore of the Flathead Lake. It's also home to roughly 5,000 or 6,000 people. I was born and raised there, but as soon as I got old enough, I moved away to the state's capital, Helena, to further my studies. I didn't visit home often, It's a very short distance, and quite frankly, there isn't much interesting things to do there anyhow. Somewhere during the third year of my studies, 4 of us decided to go back to the holidays, visiting our parents, friends, and acquaintances. We lasted 3 entire days before getting completely bored there, and were already making plans on how to spend time more wisely and have a little more fun while we were home. We planned a couple of road trips, one of which was a boat drive to the Wild Horse Island. This island is small, and you could walk across it in 1 hour. It is a nice spot for camping and swimming. The lower part of the lake, near the shore, is covered with trees, and the top part, near the center, is rocky, covered in thick grass and wilderness. The plan was to arrive during the afternoon, rent a boat, and set up camp right before sundown. But sometimes, things don't go quite as planned, and we began having car troubles from the trip from Polson to Dayton. We had to stop at a mechanic. We were delayed for over 5 hours, and it was already very late when we arrived. Luckily, the man that worked there was a friend of my father's, so he waited for us to give the keys and instruct us how to use the boat properly. The boat trip is extremely short, under just a little 3 miles. We didn't want to wait for the morning just to go across. We got in the boat, started the engine, and headed for the coast of the Wild Horse Island. You know that feeling when a day starts badly and ends up even worse? This was one of those. We crossed about 3/4 of the way of the island, and the boat's engine suddenly ceased functioning. We took out our phones to call for help. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a signal. None of us knew anything about boats or mechanics. We didn't even want to bother to try and fix it. Instead, we all reached for a paddle and began swinging together. At this point, we didn't even feel like finishing the camping trip. It was too much closer to go to the island instead of going back and waiting for help tomorrow. As we got closer to the shoreline, really weird things started to happen, one by one. First, there were waves rocking our boat, slowing us down, which was very unusual for this part of the lake. Long after the waves, we all spotted something going out of the water and quickly diving back in. It was not a normal-looking fish, that was certain. Its head was the size of an adult human, and we all had a pretty good idea about what we had just saw. Everybody that lived near the lake in Montana has heard the story about the Flathead Lake monster. It's this urban myth about an eel-like creature. In the old Native American stories, it's said that this monster came on land and killed an entire village that was also crossing the frozen lake from island to island on foot. The gigantic eel was now underwater, but we could sense it swimming towards us. We all grabbed the boat's sail to try and hold on. After a few seconds, 2 large antler-like protrusions struck the boat so hard, we split in half. 2 of us remained on one part, while the other 2 stayed on the other. One of my friends and I were luckier, because our part of the boat went straight to the shore from impact. We had the chance to jump out and get to land. The other 2 guys weren't so lucky. Their part was still floating around a little further from the shore. From where I stood, I could see the creature turn around and head back to them. It was abnormally long, maybe over 40 feet. Its eyes were this deep red, and it had these horns coming out of its body. It was a terrifying sight. I couldn't do anything to help my friends, so I stood there, watching helplessly, waiting to see what would happen next. The monster crashed into the boat again, pushing them further from the shore, and quickly, after it hit, this time moving them closer. They got lucky, jumping out of the remaining boat part, because the water was now shallow enough, and the monster was too big to swim that close. We all stood there, petrified and watching it slowly descend back into the dark water, disappearing. Later, we made a fire to warm up the 2 friends that were soaking wet, covering them with blankets. None of us got any sleep. We were all sitting awake, talking, observing the water. In the morning, a fisherman sailed out to the lake. After an hour or two, we finally managed to get attention from one of the boats floating in the lake. The fisherman picks us up, transporting us back to Dayton. We told him about what had happened. I'm not sure he believed us. It didn't even matter. We were back on land safely, and we could finally head back to home. I don't think any of us dared to go anywhere near the lakes or swim any place other than a pool since that night. I'll talk about a weird encounter, or sighting. Either way, I had this when I was just a teenager. Just to make a few things clear, I'm a non-believer and very skeptical about a lot of things. There are no mental illnesses that I'm aware of. This was just weird. I grew up in northwestern Montana, and my life just happened across fields and farms, just outside the occasional creepy stories we'd all tell each other. But nobody saw anything strange. When I was around 16, I had this crush on a girl from school, and to be honest, I didn't have that much money, but I was still really wanting to impress her. One night, I decided to take my dad's boat out of the garage, drive her for a romantic night at Flathead Lake. My parents were visiting some family members away, and they had left me at home for school. I remember trying to impress her with my knowledge about sailing and the winds. My father always loved aquatic activities, and it would help me around him. He still does. We had just gotten by the shore in the middle of the night with my car. We were on boat, chilling and talking. I can remember it was a cold night, and I was feeling terribly happy. We were going to get to cuddle, and all the other excuses that come with it. Yes, we were awkward. We kinda were in a fuzzy state, and ignoring all the usual signals. I remember hearing the typical night sounds you'd hear in the wild, but it all stopping once we got into the lake. No wind, no murmuring from the water, nothing. But I was 16 and kind of on the horny side. She probably was in a similar state. And suddenly, this very cold wind comes towards us. While it was during summer, being in a lake at night was cold, but not this time of cold. It was freezing. We were south of Dayton, close to Cromwell and Wild Horse Islands. We had a lantern and a radio, and suddenly, she never gave me her name, by the way, so we'll call her Sarah. She points her finger at the water, and we see these strange antlers coming out of the surface. Weird. And suddenly, a hairless dark head appears out of the water and begins moving towards us. It could not mean anything good. I turned on the motor and just going towards Wild Horse Island, sailing around it and then returning to the coast. Sally had asked me to go back. Like we weren't scared of anything, but it was the weirdest animal I'd ever seen. I remember her commenting on Nessie from Scotland and the Flathead monster from here. Whatever it was, we returned to the coast and saw police by my car. Apparently, somebody somewhere had seen weird movements at night and gave a call. The cops did not believe us when we told them about the sighting, just thought we were up to mischief. But still, let us go when they didn't see we had drugs or alcohol. Thank luck. Sarah and I passed as older people, and one of the guys looked like he'd rather not be here with us. And that's how my kind of romantic date ended up ruined by a water serpent with antlers. I think I might have seen a monster once. I'm not even sure. I don't like to jump to conclusions, and I'm definitely not that sort of person that just immediately embraces the supernatural when confronted with bizarre situations. I don't know what else it could have been. But let me get into more detail. I was once a very horny teenager, as we all were. But what does that mean? Well, it means that I would go around and making very dumb, questionable decisions, rather than letting my rational brain try and figure things out. I was always trying to get into a girl's pants, and get to know what all the buzz is about. So, if you're going to be here questioning the morality of my decisions, consider giving me a pass by thinking about the things you too probably did back in the day, just for your chance to experience getting laid. Anyway, I had just started dating this girl, Tamara, not her real name. We'd been out a few times and things seemed to be working out just fine. Lately, we'd been getting really handsy, but every time we'd get a chance to go all the way, she was hesitant. She wanted to save it for a special day. Of course, most of my brain power was dedicated to figuring out how to make one of our dates special enough for her to reconsider. And suddenly, like a gift from the skies, or maybe she was just as eager as I was, to be honest, she dropped me a hint right on a silver platter. On one of our dates, she mentioned how much she loved boats and how hot she considered to see guys driving a boat, commanding their ships like masters of the water. She directly told me if I would take her on a nice evening boat, she would consider it a very special gesture. I may be clueless, but I got what she meant. Or at least I hoped I did. So the plan was. As it was also very characteristic of all teenagers, I was broke. I looked at prices for boat rentals and realized it was entirely out of my budget. I did not want to spend around 3 months saving up for this occasion. I wanted to make it happen ASAP. But luckily, I was living around 30 minutes away from Flathead Lake in Montana. My dad was a boat enthusiast. This meant that he had a small boat stationed in the lake for us to use during the summer, and therefore, I went straight and asked him if I could borrow his boat to take my girlfriend for a ride around the lake. He agreed right away, said he could take us up himself with no problem at all. I knew having my dad at the date would ruin the special mood Tamara was looking for. Plus, it would take away all the cool factor of her seeing me maneuver it. I explained this to him, but he said there would be no way he would let me drive the boat on my own. At least until I had gone on a few trips with him and proven that I knew how to do it properly. That was not going to stop me. I figured out where he kept the keys for it and took them while he was out. Did I have any idea how to drive a boat? Not at all. But I figured it wouldn't be too hard to learn as I go. See what I mean? Smart decisions. We got into the lake early afternoon and went straight into my father's boat. After a few moments of fumbling with it to try to get it to start, I was lucky to managing to put the boat in motion, somewhat hiding the fact I didn't know what I was doing. Tamara seemed satisfied, though. She kept giving me very suggestive looks. We rode the boat around the lake for some time, and even though my driving wasn't smooth at all, I struggled to change directions. The ride, though, went surprisingly well, and we both had a great time. I was beginning to actually enjoy this and her company. Maybe sex wasn't what this was all about. And suddenly, out of nowhere, a massive rock popped up, right in front of the boat. I panicked, doing my best to maneuver to try and avoid it. However, this rock was also moving. The sudden turn was not enough to get us out of the way, and the boat hit the rock sideways at full speed, making it completely capsize, and we were both thrown straight into the lake. Luckily, we were both aware of how to swim, and we moved right next to the boat, trying to turn it over. There was no way we'd make it out to the shoreline from swimming at the distance we were in. After a few useless attempts at pushing, we gave up. We were starting to get desperate, and suddenly I felt something huge swimming under my feet. Something massive. I look down, and I see this massive black mass right underneath me. I grab Tamara, begin swimming on the opposite direction as fast as I could, trying to get us away from whatever that was. A second later, a massive black snout protruded from the lake, pushing the boat's edge and making it turn over. Immediately afterwards, the snout got right inside the lake again, disappearing into its depths. Tamara and I swam right inside the boat, and I drove it straight to the shore, shaken by what had happened. The boat was surprisingly unharmed. My father never found out. But it was later that I realized what we crashed against was not a rock. I still don't know what it was. I know everybody talks about Flossie and whatnot. I guess it might have been her, and she's just a prehistoric aquatic serpent scientists still haven't found out. I'll probably never know. But all I know is that this was my first and last time that I ever got cock-blocked by a monster. In the end, the situation drove me and Tamara super close. And, well, now, we're actually engaged. So I guess I should be thankful. I've lived in Helena, Montana, just about my entire life. I love it. I wouldn't wish for it to change. Not ever. Except for this one time when something that I just can't get out of my mind. Even today. And it's been a couple of months. So, I'll give you some context. I have my own house, big yard, a lawn, and everything else. There's a really neat barbecue spot right behind the house, a backyard, and a small shed for keeping gardening supplies. I love growing my own vegetables. One day, I needed to throw some stuff from my backyard into the dumpster. Instead of using a garbage bag, I ended up pulling the trash can outside my house to the back and began disposing of the things in it. It was late afternoon with no prior prediction of rain. It suddenly began raining out of nowhere, and it was not slow. The sky became very dark with thick black clouds. You could hear the thunder rumbling miles away, preceded by lightning far, far away. I ran back inside, already soaked in rain. Immediately, I went to go and take a warm shower and came out after 20-ish minutes. I was drying my hair while walking around, looking outside the backyard from my window. That's when I noticed a shadowy figure. At first, I thought it was just me, but then I heard rattling, and I saw the figure moving. It was easy to notice because the figure, whoever it was, had quite a bulky body, although the stature was kind of short. Anyway, I couldn't tell who it was. I couldn't even see anything beyond the silhouette and the body frame. It was still pouring down with occasional lightning and thunder, but it wasn't enough for me to see who it was. Just a few seconds after I'd been standing there, peering out of my window, thinking of what to do, there was another flash of purple, blue lightning in the sky, lighting up the entire backyard. That's when I saw it. It wasn't a person. It was this strange creature. A living, breathing thing that did not make sense to me. I've never seen anything like that before. It was rummaging inside the trash can, looking for food, I imagined. It had a scaly, dry texture, a long tail, flat mouth. Looked like a lizard, but bigger and upright. It had legs, and it was standing on two of its feet. It was very creepy, and didn't help that I absolutely hate lizards. I shuddered, got my phone and dialed 911. I told them there was somebody in my backyard, and they said they had already dispatched a unit. Just then, probably sensing me there, it turned around and, gosh, I wish it hadn't. It wasn't exactly like a lizard, which made me want to throw up. But what disturbed me even more was the thing was standing on its legs and had a body similar to a human. What? I pulled the curtains and I checked all the doors and windows, made sure they were locked. Then, I waited for the police to show up. They did, just a few minutes after, and knocked on my door, announcing themselves. That's when I went outside, and I followed them to my backyard. But other than a really messy and dirty backyard, there was nothing. I've always found astronomy pretty interesting. I even took a few extra courses in college on it, even though my professors told me it wouldn't help me with anything in my career, which I bet they're wrong about. People in NASA still hire those without an astronomical amount of educational background. But I still went with it. I even worked the entire summer, saving up enough money to get myself a portable travel scope. It's like my best friend now. The best thing about living in Montana is the perfect spots for stargazing. For example, I live near Brush Lake State Park, so every now and then, when the night is clear enough, I go there for stargazing. The guards there, I befriended them, and often we sit together and chat a bit if they can take a break. Most of the time, they'll let me go and sit wherever I want, and just ask me if I'm ready to leave when it's end of their shifts. A few days back, I was in the park again, alone. It was not camping season, so there was nobody in the lodges. Nobody camping around either. So, the sound of crickets chirping was pretty loud, but also calming at the same time. I took out a cloth from my bag, spread it out on the ground, got my telescope out and set it up. Then, I began to just stare at the vast sky. So many stars. It was a cool night. Pretty enjoyable. After a while, I was lying on my back when I noticed something moving across the sky. Very slowly, though. It was faint, but because it was white, I could clearly spot it in the sky. I hurriedly got up and got my telescope to check it out. The white thing seemed like it was floating in the sky, almost kind of like a jellyfish. At least that's what it reminded me of. What was it? And just then, the sound of crickets chirping around got a lot louder. Like a lot. So much so that I had to cover up my ears. I thought about getting up and leaving, but within a few seconds, it quieted down. Suddenly. And just like that, there was silence everywhere. Almost as if there were never crickets in the park in the first place. I looked back up at the sky, but the floating jellyfish thing had disappeared. I felt a shudder, decided that I should probably go home then. I went home, lied down on my bed. I fell asleep. When I woke up, I felt incredibly refreshed. I had taken a very good nap. When I looked at my phone, I saw the date. It was 2 days after I remember coming home. I have zero recollection of anything happening, or if I just slept through the entire 2 days. Weird, right? I just moved into my new home here in Montana. A rural home, out in the country. It was something different in comparison to the city life that I've been so accustomed to. I had a house that was secluded out in the woods. There were houses near me, but it would be a bit of a walk to actually get to one of those houses. I sat in the living room. It was filled with boxes, and there was no furniture yet in it. Getting stuff into here was a pain in the butt, and I did not want to do it all right now. I'll leave it for another day, I thought to myself. The only thing I brought with me to the house was an answering machine and a landline, which was now going off. I answered it. It was the man from next door. He told me he got my number from the landlord, and he was checking in to discuss getting things down into the house, asking me if I needed help. I told him I was all right, hung up, and then went out to look at my new piece of land. It was nice. I felt like an adult, moving out of the home, and I could just sit and experience and enjoy life. I saw something very, very distant. It looked very familiar to a large dog. I wanted to call out to it, but I didn't know if it was a friendly canine. I mean, I did not want to risk anything. I thought that I'd later go out there with some meat to feed him, if he was a stray, maybe even take him in. I set my coffee mug down. The dog looked in my direction and took off running. I've always known dogs had good hearing, but I didn't see how he heard that from so far away, at least from me. I shrugged it off, went back inside. I was tired, struggling to keep my eyes open. So, I lay down on the couch just to rest my eyes for a bit, and I ended up passing out. When I woke back up, the first thing I did was check the clock. It was 10 at night, dark outside. I got up, stretched my arms and yawned. I put on my slippers and walked in the kitchen. I opened the fridge. There was not much in there, aside from some soda and a package of hot dogs. I closed it, grabbed my keys, and decided I was just going to go out and get something to munch on. I walked out the door. My car was lower. I began speeding and moving towards it. My car had a flat. Well, not really a flat. It looked like something bit a chunk out of my tire. I ran my hand over it, and there was an entire chunk cut out. Did somebody carve it with a knife? What would come out here and take a chunk out of my tire? I wondered it to myself. I looked on the ground, by my tire, and there was a pathway leading to the trees. It looked like large canine prints, but they were different. Whatever left these tracks was a huge dog, possibly a German Shepherd. I remember the dog I had seen earlier and speculated that it could have been him, and before I could turn around to head back inside, I saw it with my own eyes. What stood in front of me was the largest dog-like creature I could have ever witnessed. Its teeth were sharper than that of any dog, and it snarled, exposing rows and rows of serrated sharp teeth sticking out of its jaws. Even its expression was hideous, having anger behind its eyes, and its hair was thinning on part of its face. I thought to not make any sudden movements, and I repeated it to myself underneath my breath, not speaking loud enough for it to take aggression. I began to slowly take a few steps back and look behind me just to see how close the house was. It was now moving quicker in my direction. I did what I could. I did not want to make this thing angry, no matter what I did. I saw what it did to the car tire. I could only imagine if it got a hold of me, what it would do to my body. I began trying to run through every motion in my mind. Is it possible I could outrun it? Possibly scare it off? Or should I stomp and puff out my chest? I quickly looked to my right, and then to my left. Which path was the safest? I took a deep breath, exhaling through my nose, closing my eyes and then quickly reopening them. I felt like he could sense what I was planning. Something. He began moving closer and closer. I looked back at my house. There was about a 40% chance I could possibly make it to my door before this thing. I braced myself. I was going to take the chance. And right before I took off, when I heard another howl in the distance, probably several hundred yards away, north, I stopped, looked back at the dog, who was now looking towards the direction of this howl. It looked back at me and snarled before jumping down to all fours, running in that direction, away from me. I didn't waste any more time. I quickly went inside, locked the door. I'm not sure what that was all about. That was the freakiest dog I'd ever seen, and by the sounds of it, there were more of them. Maybe its partner or mate was calling to it. Either way, I hope they don't come back. Moose are a part of life in Montana. They're big, inconvenient tanks that will wrap themselves in your car and then walk away from the carnage as if it weren't entirely their fault. Most people here know better than to speed down roads surrounded by woods, but every now and again, you hear about somebody who got unlucky and lost their car as a part of the process. With that being said, I was no stranger to moose. I pulled my phone from my cup holder, punching in a few numbers, knowing better than to lay in a horn and risk pissing it off. All that would come off as it would be an inspiring streak of stubbornness that moose were born with. And my boss understood, wished me luck as I settled in the wait. But this particular moose was big enough to block traffic both ways. Although I was the only one there to suffer the inconvenience, and it was only a 2-lane road. It was starting to unnerve me the way it just kept staring. It was in no hurry to go anywhere, which was standard moose mayhem. But there was something in its eyes that freaked me right out. Almost as if it were conscious of its actions and the impact they held. I'd asked, "Are you going to move sometime today?" Talking to it, of course, was senseless. It's not like it understood English. But at that time, I'd been bored and agitated. It turned to face me, delight clear in its glassy eyes. The thing was seriously giving me the willies, and the longer I sat there, watching it watch me, the more I became uneasy. Why was it staring? What did it want? Did moose play pranks, and if so, how long did they last? When would it leave me be? How long was I supposed to be stared down by it? I had a million questions, but as much as I had wanted answers, I also don't want to know. Its knowing expression was too much for me. My grandmother's stories of mischievous beings that changed shape for the sake of causing mayhem, both harmless and not, came to mind as I waited. She always warned me to take extra care when dealing with a shapeshifter. If they know you know, they'll steal your shape and send you away. While none of that sounded particularly believable, I couldn't help but wonder if she'd been right. If the moose figured out that I'd figured out that it wasn't a real moose, then would it charge my car? Was my grandmother right all along? It was still staring at me. Did it know that I knew? Was it too late to back up until I found another street to turn on? Either way, my gut was warning me not to stay there for another moment. I hit the gas when my car was on reverse, cursing and screaming as that spurted on to give chase. And suddenly, the moose and I were both going 30 miles an hour backwards, and it was all I could do to switch gears, swerve around the antlered embodiment of violence. It didn't give chase, luckily, and when I turned back, there was nothing at all. My mom basically believes in a bunch of nonsense. She hangs garlic near the entryways, never invites anybody in, and she doesn't call over. She has feared shapeshifters and skinwalkers and vampires. She didn't care if it seemed ridiculous. So, when I had invited over a woman from the club that I'd gone to the night before, I'd made extra certain that my mother was good and asleep before opening the back door and quietly trying to usher her in. She had taken one step onto my porch before backpedaling and refusing outright. So, I had to lead her around the back to get her inside. She'd been uncertain, fidgety even, as she sat there in my bedroom, waiting for the main event, but that jittery persona did not go away until after our extracurricular activities. If anything, it worsened. She seemed to buzz with anxiety as she lay at my side. I'd assumed it was her fear of getting caught. We'd had a long talk about overbearing parents before we decided to go home together. It was possible that she too was afraid of the way that my mother would react had she found a strange woman in her home. I assured her that nobody would come into my space. That alone seemed to be enough for her, and her nervousness faded almost instantly. Then she was kissing my neck again. I remembered her gazing into my eyes, enchanting me with the shades of blue and green that I don't remember anything after that. But my mother had been less pleased to see me next morning. It would seem that despite my best efforts, my escapades had been heard from the very top floor. She fussed over me, force-feeding me soup and berating me for being so foolish as to let a vampire inside. I nearly laughed. Nearly. Montana was home to many things, and while I'd seen the occasional bat, vampires were quite the stretch. I'd sooner believe in monsters and werewolves than blood-sucking monsters from beyond the grave. Mom, however, was not amused. She pulled a mirror from her bag and showed me the puncture marks upon my collar, as if they would prove anything. I stared at them for several moments, trying to wipe them free of my skin, as if they were made of marker or paint, before I loudly insisted that their jokes, while hilarious, were unnecessary. Nobody bothered me after that, but now that I'm back in my room, I'm stuck wondering, had I truly encountered somebody who maybe was a wannabe vampire? It seemed unlikely, almost impossible since even my mother's stories insisted he should be elsewhere. But Mother seemed so sure now. I'm asking my audience. Maybe you all have better leads than I do. While I may not be dealing with a supernatural creature, it's possible I could be dealing with a vampire cult, people who worship the idea of being a vampire. often prefer Satanism and drinking their own blood or the blood of others, filing their teeth, those kinds of people. Is it possible? Yes. The University of Montana is a very unusual place. I had heard stories here and there, but seeing it for myself was another thing completely. I enrolled back in 2014 to study anthropology. I had always been interested in humans and how we got here, done what we did. I grew up in Connecticut, have not left my state often while growing up. I was a good student. The fact that I was going to move to another state for university was very, very huge for me. I was also super excited to meet some new people, as well as being away from family for a while. A much needed change of scenery. I am also the oldest of 3 daughters, and the weight my parents put on me when it comes to taking care of the house and my sisters has really become to be a burden. I was very excited to gain at least a little bit of independence. I officially moved to campus in August, that time before classes started, when I had some time to get to know roommates and other new people in my program. It was amazing. Pretty quickly, stories about paranormal activities began spreading among freshmen like wildfire. Some of us were freaked out by them, but others like myself laughed at them, brushing them off. We thought that it was one of those urban legends that are made and to spread and attract people. One of my best friends to this day, a girl I met on the very first day of my time on being on campus. Claire and I were roommates from the first day. We had lived together for the whole duration of our studies. She studied computer science and mathematics. We had another roommate, Mary, who studied psychology. We would spend a lot of time together. We even went to the library to study together. The first year, our first Halloween on campus was a blast. We all woke up in the morning after to see that somebody had stuck a pumpkin on the spire of the main hall building. We were informed that this happens every year for Halloween, and nobody knows who puts the pumpkins up there, as the building is quite tall, and the spire itself doesn't have anything that a person could hold on to. The very first time I experienced one of those legends about the university was in the 2nd semester. Mary and I were studying in the library. It was pretty late in the day. It was beginning to get dark out. We left the library. As we're going back to our dorm, we decided to go through the main building. We both needed to use the bathroom, and the main hall has them in the basement. We went down, entering adjacent stalls. I finished first, stepped out to wash my hands. While I was doing that, I heard somebody was knocking on the door. I said that it's open, but nobody went in. As I finished washing my hands, Mary left her stall and began doing the same thing. We heard the knock again. I was a little surprised to see that there was nobody by the door as I opened them, but we guessed that somebody was trying to pull a prank on us. We left the bathroom, heading towards the stairs. This is when we saw a man in a red flannel shirt slowly walking in front of us. He did not turn around or say anything. We also didn't think much of him. He sort of looked at the steps as we're walking up, but by the time we climbed out, he was gone. He was no longer in front of us, and there was nowhere for him to go. On another occasion, about a year after that incident in the main hall, Claire and I found ourselves in the Brantley Hall. The building itself made my skin crawl. We've heard of all kinds of stuff happening there. A few of our friends told us about a girl who still haunts the place. Apparently, she killed herself in there, back in the 1920s. We did not see her, but we did see a dog. This was strange. It's well known that pets are not allowed in the building. It looked like a German Shepherd and seemed very friendly and happy. The fact that it was there, despite the no pets allowed policy, turned out to be the strangest thing. It disappeared right in front of me. It was running toward me as I tried to pet it. It just vanished. We also later heard that it probably belonged to somebody who tragically died. I never dared to enter the tunnels underneath the campus. The tunnels became notorious for alleged paranormal events. And it also became so popular among students who would go down there, seeking a thrill. A lot of them managing to get lost and needed to be rescued. The tunnels were eventually locked away, and nobody was allowed to go down there. But everybody knows that cannot stop a group of bored students. Mary once joined a group of them, sneaking into the tunnels. She said that it was scary, purely because it's so cold and dark down there, but not that she had seen or experienced anything of the paranormal. It's not just the buildings on campus that are haunted, if you ask me. I've had some strange things happen to me on several occasions, all throughout Missoula. Out of campus, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, I was quite skeptical about the supernatural, all before coming to that university. I soon realized that it was probably for the better that I try and stay away from places that were well known for some strange things happening here. Even if there really was somebody who dedicated so much time to scare the life out of students, I did not want to meet them. Everybody knows Montana is the big sky country, famous for its mountains, lakes, and breathtaking views. I visited with my friends, and one of my friends, Sarah, her parents recently purchased this beautiful house in Condon, Montana. 3 bedrooms that were massive, a massive kitchen, 1 garage, and what looked to be a mini lake in the backyard. Now, the backyard was also directly connected to woods, but across these woods was yet another house, looking mostly abandoned for the most part. Sarah's parents let us use the house for vacation. Our first day in the area was so nice. We decided to light up some fire and enjoy the backyard view. We collected the woods, set up the fireplace with rock, and lit the fire. I locked all the doors of the house, especially the front door, just for the sake of safety. We continued our fun in the backyard. The house across the woods was visible in the daylight, but when the night struck, it was pitch dark there. When my friends and I were singing, we heard something towards the front door. Sarah ran to check, and she called us screaming. We went to check what was going on, and we saw that our dirt bags were ripped open. As far as I remember, we put the dirt bags near dustbins placed on the street for every house on the street. Then, how did the bags ended up on our door? We assumed it could have been a dog, or maybe somebody else who did this. The street was more curvier, and there were fewer houses near it, so it was kind of deserted at night. As I got up and turned around, I see something running across the street. It was only though for a split second, so I ignored it, went inside the house to resume our fun night. The house was large, beautiful, and it had a bathroom for every room. 2 of them were on the ground floor. Anna and I went to go clean ourselves after cleaning the front door. I was still enjoying the royalty in the bathroom and feeling quite swamped, when suddenly Anna shrieked, and hearing that, I regained a sort of sense of reality. Sarah and I went to check on her, and she was lying on the floor of the bathroom, unconscious. Her forehead looked like it was bleeding. She had bumped it on the door. We took her to the bedroom, allowing her to lie down for a while. We were discussing about things happening here, and the depth of some of the incidents. Sometimes, I really think we should have planned this vacation here. When Anna regained her consciousness, we asked her about what had happened to her, and why she was in that state. She told us something very scary, that when she was about to take a shower, she closed the door, walked towards the window to close it too. There, she saw that a weird face was looking directly at her. It looked like a melted face, but it was bald and bright and skinny in color. When she screamed, it disappeared, and she could not remember anything any further. The features she told us were very disturbing. Everything happening around us was also very frightening. We assumed it might be some creep doing this, and it should not ruin our fun. Next day, all 3 of us decided to drive down the area, explore any tourist place available. On the way was this beautiful street. It was Snake Street, which means it was curvier, and there were trees covering the pathway. Trees with some yellow and orange. It looked beautiful. We decided to stay there and do a photo shoot while enjoying the view. I held the camera. Sarah stood in front of the dense, beautiful trees, and Anna sat on the roof of the car, giving us encouragement. We spent around 2 hours there. After that, I was done, and we were scrolling through pictures on the camera when Sarah, standing on the street and far behind her, was something in the tree. At first, I looked with the camera, and then I looked with my eyes, but I could not get a hold of it with what I saw. There was a creature. It looked very reminiscent of a human being, but it was not one. I asked Sarah and Anna to hurry up, sitting inside the car. That thing was looking at us directly. It was all naked and had the skin that was wrinkled. The face was indescribable, and the melting cheeks and the skin below the eyes, almost like somebody was playing a prank. The body was bent, and it looked disgusting. It had stick-like legs and long hands almost holding onto the tree next to it. My eyes were wide, looking at such a thing. I could not even believe myself. When I shouted at my friends, they did not get into the car. After that, we were sitting, both of them, asking me, why am I so agitated by what I saw? Anna agreed to the face that I saw. I knew why there were not many people. We decided to leave at once. We took a different route to reach the house, to avoid crossing paths with that thing. All three of us were silent all the way to the house. We left the area, came back to New York. Sarah had told her parents about what had happened when we were there. Her parents found out information about the house across theirs. After having a conversation with the owner about this incident, the owners told her parents that their son had the exact same experience when he was left alone in the house for weekends. They too had a similar thing happen. They even reported it to the police, but no such creature was ever found, and the file was closed. We still get chills talking about that vacation because it's so supernatural. I've lived in a privately owned land, passing through generations, in National Glacier Park, northern Montana, my whole 16 years of life. Our house is almost 1 acre, surrounded by the park on all 4 sides. At the back of our house is the River McDonald. It flows constantly all year round. Honestly, it's so quiet and peaceful and beautiful to live here. I have no complaints. We have to ride in the car for 2 hours, though, just to get to school or even the city to buy groceries. We live very far out. One day, I was paired up with a boy for science school project, since my mother wouldn't allow me to go to his house for work. We had decided to work on the project at my house, and just as a side note, he was also my crush at the time. He came to my house a couple of times to work on our project, and by the 5th time, we were finished, but we still had 2 hours till Jacob, not his real name, had come to pick him up. We decided to go to the back of the house and walk alongside the river. The weather was so pleasant that day. Anyway, I told my mother that we were going to walk outside. She allowed it before saying that we shouldn't go too far and come back before dark. Affirming her that we would be back, we both put our shoes on and went outside. As we were walking parallel to the river flow, we talk about random things like favorite foods, music genres, movie genres, basically all the typical conversation starters. We were so caught up in our own conversations, we had not realized almost an hour had passed. The sun was going down, and we had walked way too far from the house. My mother will surely kill us both. We turned to go back to my house, and we heard something loud rustling from the other side of the river, where the forest was. The trees were so densely packed we could not even see what was making that loud noise, ignoring the sounds, thinking that it was just some deer. We started walking back. It was then he asked me about my relationship status, to which I replied I was single, since my mother was so strict. I thought he was going to ask me out, before we had heard the same rustling and branches snapping. Nature was against us getting together. When we looked to see what it was, we saw this long thing. It was like a stick, but black, and standing in front of the tree, like a shadow but standing still and real. It was unnaturally thin, and so dark that it nearly blended in with the trees behind it. We don't even know for how long it was following us. We surely wouldn't have noticed it while being so immersed in our conversations. Scared, we began running towards the direction of my home. We wanted to reach it fast before dark. Nobody knew what it would do to us in the dark, and since it was like a shadow, we would not have been able to fight it. Sprinting like our lives depended on it. Well, they actually did. We soon reached my house. Out of breath and heaving, we first fixed our hair and clothes. I did not want my mom to think anything, like we had gone to make out, or worse. When we were ready, we went inside, greeted my mother like we didn't see anything strange, creepy, or the ominous shadow man in the woods. Both me and Jacob were creeped out, started searching on our phones for what the thing was. Turns out, what we had seen was indeed a shadow man. Apparently, they can cling onto your souls and make you do things, like mind control, except they do more than your mind. They take over your spirit and body, and do whatever they want. Think like a full possession, except instead of being possessed, you're very aware. You are merely a puppet. We're thankful we reached home before dark. 4 years ago, I moved into my new apartment in Montana, right after I got a job here. It was a small rented apartment. It featured a pool and a gym. It had 2 rooms, 1 bathroom, for $300 a month. This was acceptable. On the first night that I'd shifted here, I could not sleep. I was anxious for my job the next day, and also, sleeping in a new place is hard for me. I had to take a few days to adjust to the new bed. Around 9 p.m., I went outside my apartment, decided to explore the pool room, thinking, maybe if I swim, then I'll tire myself enough to sleep before 11. When I reached the pool room, it was completely empty, with a staunch smell of chlorine wafting through the room. There was a large pool starting from the end of the room to the middle. It was huge. I dressed in my trunks, jumping in. Somewhere between my second lap, I heard this weird mechanical sound coming from somewhere above. When I looked above, there was this huge lizard, or so I had thought. As I looked at it more, I could see that it had the body of a lizard, but had more legs like that of a spider, kind of like a giant cockroach or something. It creeped out. I quickly got out of the pool, began getting dressed so I can go out and complain by this massive-looking bug thing on the ceiling. As I began to reach towards the door, it was as if somebody had clicked a button on the creature began moving fast. Not towards me, but towards one of the large vents attached to the back of the room. However, the most shocking thing was that the vent had grills, and the grills were so close that the only small lizard could pass through it. Surprisingly, this creature vanished through the vent, as if it wasn't that big. I went out and complained at the front desk, and the receptionist just gave me a look like she did not know what to tell me. After that incident, that receptionist never came back to tell me what they had witnessed, but I know they saw it too, because when they came back to the desk, they too had a white look on their face. I'm not really quite sure what I saw either, but it freaked me out.